Eva Tompkins, Esquire, is a New York attorney and a trader of currencies and equity and commodity futures. She practiced law for 19 years before retiring from the practice of law to start her business in the area of finance. She's an active participant in the financial markets. As such, she monitors the activity and monetary policies of the central banks around the world. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Eva Tompkins.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful interview. Or the wonderful intro. I really appreciate it. That was quite nice. It's my great pleasure to be here with you and to be here tonight to speak to you about CBDCs, tokenization of assets, and Revelation 13, Satan's no buy, no sell policy. But before we get started, let us pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this opportunity to review your word and to review current events and see how things are playing out according to prophecy. I ask that I not be seen, but that you be seen through me, and please speak through me. And fill me with your Holy Spirit and prepare the hearts and minds of everyone watching here today and online and who will watch this in the future. And I ask all of these things in Jesus' precious name, amen. So, CBDCs, tokenization of assets, and Revelation 13. So I just want to say that this is not financial advice. This isn't legal advice. This is just for educational purposes only. I can't possibly tell you what to do with your money or your property. I don't know your circumstances, and I'm not licensed to give that type of advice. So I cannot advise you in financial matters. I'm a licensed attorney in New York, but I'm not a licensed financial advisor. So who am I? Like Craig said, I'm a New York attorney. I've been practicing law for about 25 years now, more than 25 years I think now. I practiced law actively in New York for 19 years before I retired to do finance, but I'm still a licensed attorney. And I watch the central banks very closely in order to trade the financial markets. So during the pandemic, I was out in the world. I grew up Adventist from childhood, and I left the church, drifted away from the church when I was in college. And I was out of the church for 33 years. And I came back to the church during the pandemic because I saw changes happening. People ask why I left the church. I think that my dad always taught me to think critically. And tomorrow I'll be talking to you, tomorrow night I'll be speaking about critical thinking. So he always stoked in me this interest to be a critical thinker. And he would ask me questions and I would answer, and we'd consider ideas and go back and forth, considering all sides and all perspectives. When it came to the Revelation 13 prophecies, all the Revelation and Daniel prophecies, I just didn't believe them. Because I had decided from the 7th grade that I was going to law school. That was the track I was on. I was dead set from the 7th grade. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to go into court. I wanted to do all of those things because I love to argue with my dad back and forth. And so I knew I was going to law school. So my track was, they wanted to send me to a Christian academy. They wanted to send me to an Adventist academy. And I just didn't feel like this educational standards were there. And my goal was to get the best education possible, get into a good college, get into a good law school, and get a good job. That was my track. And that's what I was focused on. So in high school and before high school, I was studying the Constitution. I was studying all our First Amendment rights and the Supreme Court. And so when we were taught the Revelation prophecies, I just didn't believe them because I didn't think it could happen here. And so when I was 16 years old, I remember quite clearly there was a Sabbath day where I was sitting in church with my family. And back then we had the paper bulletins and there was a blank page on the back. So we had a visiting pastor from our church, and he came to talk about the Revelation prophecies. And I was sitting there, and he's going on, and I drew an outline on the back of that bulletin, point by point, why he was wrong and why the Revelation prophecies couldn't happen, because we had a Constitution, and we have a Supreme Court, and we have the First Amendment, and we have the right to free exercise of religion, and Congress cannot make any law respecting religion. We have freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. There's no way this could happen here. Well, during the pandemic, I saw them throw the Constitution right out the window. All rights were taken away from us. And that really, really is what flipped the switch for me. There was a particular gym in New Jersey, in Belmar, New Jersey, and they were featured on Tucker Carlson a few times. They were Atilis Gym, and the gym owners would come on Tucker Carlson and talk about how when the pandemic happened and COVID was announced, they really didn't know what they were dealing with, so they did close for a short period of time. But then they realized, we're a gym. Our members are healthy, and we can keep them healthy. It's not right to be locked at home, sitting at home, waiting for some virus to pass. They figured if we open our gym, it's an opportunity for people to get and stay healthy. And that way, that's their best defense against any virus. This is what they said. So they wanted to stay open, and they were defying Governor Murphy in New Jersey. And the state made an example out of them. The state really persecuted them. He revoked their business license. The criminal charges were brought against them. They were fined like over $15,000 per day. Over time, the fines amounted to millions of dollars. And they were extremely responsible. Like at one point, they were carrying 30,000 pounds worth of gym equipment out to the parking lot so that people could work out outside. That wasn't, the state still wasn't having it, and still just fought them head on and made an example of them. At one point, they had all the gym equipment inside, but the state kept trying to lock their doors. So they took the doors off the gym so that the state couldn't lock them. So this went back and forth with the state of New Jersey. And they just said, we're not going to be ruled by a tyrant. We're doing things responsibly. We're keeping things clean and safe. So we're not going to close. And you can't close us down. So all in all, they had over 300,000 visits to their gym. Not one single case of COVID could be attributed to their gym. They were really super responsible. So one day, they woke up to a bank balance of zero. Their legal defense fund, which had over $170,000 in it, was just gone. The state just took it. While this matter was in controversy and being litigated in the courts, the state took their legal defense fund. That's what did it for me. I was like, the state can't do this. They're clearly overreaching. Constitution out the window. Now they're taking people's assets. So at that point, I could clearly see how Christians will be prosecuted in the end times. And then shortly after that, I started seeing this central bank digital currency thing start ramping up among the central banks. So that's what brought me back to the church, and I was rebaptized last April. So praise God for that. So Ellen G. White says, we're called upon to be watchmen. We're Christ's ambassadors. We're watchmen unto the house of Israel to see the dangers that await souls and give them warning. So this is just explaining why I'm here before you today, because I feel I have a responsibility to tell you what I see happening. I see them erecting the architecture for the enforcement of Satan's no buy, no sell policy, and I'll show you evidence of that. So Ellen G. White goes on to say in the Review and Herald, October 22nd, 1903, we're called upon to be watchmen. The Lord is soon coming, she says. The watchmen on the walls of Zion are called upon to awake to their God-given responsibility. Many of them are in the stupor of insensibility. God calls for watchmen who, in the power of the Spirit, will give to the world a message. Watchmen who will proclaim the time of night. He calls for watchmen who will arouse men and women from their lethargy, lest they sleep the sleep of death. So that's why I feel a burden on my heart to share with you what I'm sharing this evening, because I can see clearly how they are setting up a system to turn off your money, prevent you from buying or selling, and take all your assets. And I don't do this to scare you. I don't want to scare you, and we shouldn't be scared. We should not have a spirit of fear. God doesn't want us to have a spirit of fear, but we can rejoice and be joyful because all of these things mean that Jesus is coming soon. It's not just something you hear in church from your pastor. Jesus is coming soon. So my ministry is Revelation 13:17 cbdcwatch.substack.com, and I write there about things, developments that I see happening. So let's read Revelation 13:15 through 16. And that states, "And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many who would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads." And then this is the key verse, in my opinion, that really implies the type of financial repression that God's people will be under just before Jesus comes. "That no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." That's the key verse here. So what are central bank digital currencies? What are they? CBDC is fully programmable, fully traceable digital currency that is centralized and distributed by a government or its central bank. Because it's centralized to one authority, as opposed to being decentralized among many places, many entities, it's fully controlled and programmed by the authority that issues it. That means the government can surveil all of your financial transactions because they're all recorded on the central bank's ledger. And they can control when, where, and upon what you can spend the currency because of its programmability, which I'll show you. So why are CBDCs a threat to liberty? With CBDCs, the government would have the authority to decide and the power to enforce how you may or may not spend the CBDC that would be assigned to your digital wallet, which would be tied to your digital ID. CBDCs are designed to financially constrain the user in any way the government wishes to constrain the user, to elicit whatever behavior it wants from the user, or to punish certain behavior that it finds undesirable. And it's not just me saying this. The Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank above all the other central banks, they are the central bank that all the central banks around the world go to. That Bank of International Settlements General Manager, Augustin Carstens, said in October 2020, and you can find this video online, and I've posted it on my Substack, he was describing the difference between cash and digital currency. And he said the central bank will have the absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use or that expression of central bank liability, and will have the technology to enforce that. So what is he saying? What does that mean? Central bank digital currency, currency that the central bank issues to you, is a liability on the central bank. So what he's saying is the central bank will have the absolute control to write the rules and regulations as to how you can spend the currency, and they'll have the power to enforce that because of the technology, because it's fully programmable. Steve Forbes, also, he has this 2 or 3 minute video online, and in this video he talks about CBDCs, and he describes them as a formula for tyranny, and they truly are a formula for tyranny. What is true freedom? True freedom is financial freedom, which is the freedom to conduct whatever financial transactions you choose to conduct, to spend your money as you choose, to save as much money as you choose, to give to the charities of your choice. That is what true freedom is. And with central bank digital currency, that freedom is taken from you. So what's the difference between cash and CBDCs? Let's see. With cash, Cash transactions offer secrecy and anonymity that is necessary to have financial freedom. People can use cash to make transactions in private and in secrecy. Cash does not expire. Cash isn't dependent upon electricity or network coverage. When you have cash in your hand, you own cash, and no one can hack your $20 bill. With CBDCs, there's no privacy in any financial transaction because every financial transaction is recorded on the central bank ledger, and they can monitor that, and they can see instantly in real time what you're spending your money on and where you're spending it. They're fully traceable, meaning every transaction is monitored by the central bank. It allows central banks to surveil and control financial transactions in ways that were previously impossible. This is government surveillance of all your financial transactions. CBDCs are digital, not physical. They're vulnerable to cyber attacks. It's fully programmable, as I stated before. If the government wanted to outlaw or restrict the sale or purchase of guns or other items, it could program the CBDC such that it could not be used to purchase those items. If the government wanted to program the central bank digital currency to expire within 30 days, and this is a feature they like, that would force you to convert the currency to goods before it evaporates, because it would just expire in 30 days. They actually like that. They think that's a good feature so that they can control the money supply better. Or they might just put that expiration on to keep, we're a consumer-based economy. If people aren't spending money, then those numbers are low, and that, they want to see those numbers up. So that might be another reason why they might set the currency to expire within 30 days. So with a CBDC, a central bank or government can see all of your transactions in real time and tax you instantly. They can mandate that any and all medical procedures must be taken. They'd have the ability to turn off your money or freeze your balances if you don't comply. They could turn off your money if they don't like what you post on social media. They could turn off your money if they don't like your religious beliefs or practices. If the government passed a Sunday law, they could turn off your money if you didn't comply with that law. Like I said, it could be programmed to expire within 30 days. It could be programmed so that it can't be used to buy certain foods, goods, or services. So if the government wanted to institute a social credit score based on climate change, and assigned you a certain carbon footprint score because of your activities. They could just see what activities you're doing. They could see what you're spending your money on, and they could perhaps deny you from purchasing another flight or another tank of gas or something else if they think your carbon footprint is too high, for instance. And the central bank could institute negative interest rates, which would cause a portion of your money to be deducted from your digital wallet. This isn't unheard of. Japan has had a negative interest rate policy since 2016, and we were at zero interest rates for 14 years. There was a time when it was feared that perhaps our interest rates might go negative to stimulate the economy. We were that close. But since Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell and the whole Federal Reserve has increased interest rates, massively. They increased them over 500 basis points in a short period of time. So we don't really worry about going negative now, but it certainly was a concern at some point when we were at zero interest rates for so long. So an example of what a government could do with a CBDC, we see in Brazil. So Brazil is doing their pilot of they're doing research on their CBDC for the digital real. Their currency is called the real, and this would be the digital real. They put their code out there for people to review, and a blockchain developer in Brazil, he analyzed the code, and he saw that the code would allow Brazil's central bank to, at will, freeze and unfreeze your accounts, increase and decrease the account balances, move currency from one address to another, or create or burn digital real from a specific address. That's the kind of control they will have over your money with the CBDC. And we see that in the code for Brazil's CBDC. So presumably, all the central banks that issue CBDC would have that ability as well. Neil Kashkari. So again, this is not just me saying this. This is not conspiracy theory that the government could do this. This is actually something, because of the technology, that the government would have the power to do. So Neil Kashkari is the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. He basically said he was asked about CBDC in an interview, and this video I've posted in my Substack as well. He said CBDC doesn't solve any actual problems other than enable central bankers to monitor all your transactions, impose negative interest rates, or deduct taxes directly from your accounts in real time. And he also basically said that CBDCs don't add anything novel to the market in terms of benefits for the consumers. And an actual transcript of what part of what he said, I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside of the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving, referring to central bank digital currency. He says, I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. And then there was some laughter in the background. He says, right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? He says, and all I get is a bunch of hand waving. Well, China's doing it. He says, well, I could see why China would do it. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get why China would be interested, but why would the American people be for that? And the answer is the American people wouldn't be for that. If they knew what central bank digital currencies were and what the technology gives the government the power to do, they would be up in arms about it. They wouldn't want it at all. So this is not just me saying this. This is Neil Kashkari, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. CBDCs are being explored, tested, and developed worldwide. According to data from the Atlantic Council, as of March 2024, 134 countries and currency unions representing 98% of global GDP are exploring a CBDC. And I have a list here of countries that have already issued their CBDC. We have Nigeria, Bahamas, Antigua, and Bermuda. These are mostly like the Caribbean countries have Dcash. They're the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, so they're all using Dcash. Jamaica has a Jamdex, and Zimbabwe just came out with a digital token recently that's backed by gold. So that's pretty interesting. China's pilot was expanded to reach most of the country in 2023. 60 countries are in the advanced phases of exploring a CBDC. And a 2022 survey conducted by the Bank of International Settlements showed that 93% of the central banks that surveyed have or are developing a CBDC, and it was projected that there could be 15 retail CBDCs publicly circulating by 2030. This is a map from data on the Atlantic Council website showing the different stages that these countries are in. The colored countries are the countries that are working on a CBDC or have a CBDC. So you can see that this is a worldwide thing. This is many countries around the world representing 98% of global GDP that are preparing for a CBDC, are exploring it, are developing it in some phase or another. And this is a similar map from cbdctracker.org. You can see, again, all the different countries that are working on a CBDC. This is truly a global thing, and this is truly why we will see around the world Satan's no buy, no sell policy enforced with this type of technology. So what's the difference? There's two ways a central bank could issue CBDC. And what we have seen in the countries that have issued CBDC so far is a direct issue CBDC model, where the central bank directly issues CBDC to the consumer, to the customer. So they've done that, but at least Jerome Powell and the European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde have indicated that they wouldn't go with this model. They would go with a synthetic CBDC model. Because number one, they know that direct issue CBDCs are not popular. They're not popular in the countries that have released them. In the countries that have issued a CBDC, there's very low adoption. In Nigeria, there's like 0.5% adoption by the use and adoption by the population. They are not popular because people understand what control the government has with these things, and people just don't want to use them. They don't want the governments to be able to surveil their transactions and control what they can spend their money on. So they're just not using them. So I think the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve want it to not look like a CBDC that's been issued before, that's not popular. So they think that with a synthetic CBDC, there would be the central bank, then a major bank issuing that currency. So the central bank, major bank, then you. There's an intermediary in between you and the central bank. And Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell had said in a 2022 event hosted by the Bank of France that if we were to pursue a CBDC in the United States, it would have 4 characteristics. It would be intermediated, it would be identity verified, it would not be anonymous, because it has to be identity verified. So that means it would be issued to you in a digital wallet that would be tied to your digital ID. So there's no anonymous transactions. They would be able to see all your transactions. And it would be interoperable. Christine Lagarde also said that, basically, which is what I'll show you. So that means that the CBDC they're trying to show you is a CBDC that's issued by the central bank to the major bank you would be dealing with, like JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, possibly US Bank, some major bank, and then that would be issued to you. And I think also our Constitution, our Fourth Amendment, guarantees us certain privacies. And really, the central bank digital currency is completely contrary to our Constitution and our rights under the Constitution. The government doesn't have a right to monitor all your transactions. We are guaranteed freedom from unreasonable search and seizure by our Fourth Amendment. So a CBDC would be contrary to that. With a synthetic CBDC model where it looks like a major bank is issuing you that currency, I think they're trying to skirt the Constitution by having that type of CBDC model as well. And Federal Reserve Chairman just gave testimony before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee on March 7th, 2024, and he affirmed again that if they were going to pursue a CBDC, it would be intermediated, meaning it would be that synthetic CBDC model, where it's the central bank, then a major bank, and then you. And he said, if we were ever to do something, and this is another thing, he said, every time he's asked about central bank digital currency, he said this many times, we're not even thinking about CBDC. We're not even thinking about CBDC. And he said it again, if we were to do something like this, and we're a very long way from even thinking about it, we would do it through the banking system, meaning it would be that synthetic CBDC model. The last thing we would want with the Federal Reserve would to have individual accounts for all Americans, or any Americans for that matter. So he's just affirming that we would pursue a synthetic CBDC model where it's the central bank, then a major bank, and then you. But he keeps saying, we're not even thinking about it. That's not true. That's very disingenuous. I'll show you proof that they are thinking about it, they're testing it, and they basically have it ready to go on the shelf. They're just waiting for a crisis where they can spring it on people because they know it's not popular and people don't want it. So the European Central Bank, this is the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, and the euro was in the initial investigation stage for some time. And as of November 1st, 2023, they entered the preparation stage. So as you can see here, the ECB has designed a digital euro that would be widely accessible to citizens and businesses through distribution by supervised intermediaries. That's the synthetic CBDC model. That's where you have the central bank and the intermediary bank and then you. So that's what she means by that. And she also signaled that there will be control. There will be control with a central bank digital currency. She said that there will be limitations, and their summary report from their investigation stage says this, that there will be limitations on the amount of digital currency, that digital euros, that businesses and individuals will be able to hold. So you can't save or accumulate it. You'll be under a holding limit of how much you can have. And page 12 of the summary report actually said that holding limits were identified as an effective tool. So she's telling you there's going to be control. You're not going to be able to save as much money as you want under a CBDC system. There's going to be control by the central bank. And they're going to limit how much you can have, at least in the European Central Bank, in the Euro area. And this video actually went viral, and I wrote about this on my Substack as well. So she was prank called by someone who is appearing to be or pretending to be the president of the Ukraine, calling her. And she took the call, and he was asking her about central bank digital currency, and she noted that it's already illegal to spend more than 1,000 euros in Europe. It's illegal. It will put you on the gray market, and you're subject to penalties and possible imprisonment if you spend more than 1,000 euros in cash. And she thinks that it should be limited to 300 or 400 euros. She thinks it's dangerous for people to be able to spend cash in privacy, in a private transaction. So what are your neighbors to the north doing? What do they think about this? The Bank of Canada's progress towards a CBDC, they've been exploring a retail CBDC since 2017. It's called the e-dollar. But they say they have no immediate plans to launch a CBDC. But they want to be ready. They want to be ready in case cash disappears for some reason. So they're working on it. And so they engaged with Canadians and gathered perspectives through surveys and discussions with members of financial sector focus groups. They had an online public questionnaire, and this is what they found. They heard a diversity of views about the Canadian dollar. Financial stakeholders wanted more concrete details about how it would work. Focus groups wanted to know exactly how it would work. And respondents to the public questionnaire, the public doesn't want it. They're opposed to it. They like cash. They like the privacy of cash. They want to have that ability. And they were concerned that a digital dollar could impact their rights. And rightfully so, they should be concerned. We all should be concerned. But as Adventists, we know that at some point, the Bible tells us that at some point this is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. You know, Revelation 13:17 tells us that at some point we're going to be under such financial repression if we don't take the mark of the beast and if we don't worship the beast, which we should not do because that results in eternal death. So we don't want to worship the beast. We want the seal of God. We want to be sealed as God's people. So at some point we're going to lose our ability to buy or sell. So we know at some point that this is going to happen. It's just a question of when. And respondents said in the questionnaire they prefer banknotes because they're not easily tracked. They felt banknotes would continue to offer privacy and anonymity during transactions. So most Canadians place high importance on having access to banknotes. And what they said was next is that they're undertaking the necessary work, like I said, to be ready in case Canadian payment preferences or needs change. So they're developing it, they're exploring it and researching it, and they want to be ready in case things change for some reason, like a crisis. What are we doing in the United States? Well, in the United States right now, we have FedNow. FedNow was launched in July 2023. It's basically the infrastructure on which a CBDC can be built. It's a fast, instant payment system where you can transfer currency very fast. Right now, what we've been using all these years, basically with our credit cards and our debit cards, is bank digital currency when you think about it. You know, we use our credit cards to pay for things instead of actual pieces of paper sometimes. So this is a service, an instant payment service that is open to financial institutions and banks to sign on to and participate with, so that those financial institutions can offer fast payment services like Zelle to their customers. There are a number of banks that have signed on already. 728 banks and financial institutions have signed on to date. And you can go on that website, the website that I have the address for here, and it will show you a list of the organizations. So if you don't want to be with a bank that's signed up for FedNow, because you want to stay out of this situation for a little while, and not be have all your transactions monitored, I mean, the banks can see our transactions. They've been able to see our transaction for a while, and they've been getting a lot of data as to what we spend our money on when we use our credit cards or when we use our debit cards. But they've been pretty good about keeping that data private for the most part. There have been situations where, like with the January 6 people, Bank of America just turned over the records of anyone who was in the DC area to the FBI. They shouldn't do that. They're supposed to keep our data private, and they should wait to receive a warrant before they have to turn over anybody's records. But they just voluntarily turned it over. That's an exception. The banks otherwise have been pretty good about keeping our data private. But once we have a CBDC, the government and the central bank will be able to see all your transactions in real time, tax you accordingly, or impose negative interest rates, or otherwise program the currency in a way that they see fit. So like I said, this was launched in 2023, and it allows banks and financial institutions to enable instant payments directly from their bank accounts. This is basically describing it. And you can find this on their website. So in his testimony on March 7th, 2024, Jerome Powell again said, we're nowhere near recommending a CBDC. He says, we're nowhere near recommending, let alone adopting, central bank digital currency in any form, he told the banking committee. He said, people don't need to worry about it. Well, I think people do need to be concerned, and I'll show you why. I'll show you evidence that they've tested this, and their tests have been quite successful. Their tests have actually exceeded their expectations. So Project Hamilton is a multi-year exploratory research project by the Boston Fed and MIT's Digital Currency Institute. And they've been collaborating to do this research to explore a CBDC. So phase one had completed in about February 2022, and they issued their summary report. It exceeded their expectations for speed and throughput requirements. They tested 2 different architectures, and the best architecture had a throughput speed of 1.7 million transactions per second, with a majority of transactions completing in less than a half second. So this was a very successful test. And since then, in December 2022, they reported that they have developed a core processing engine called OpenCBDC. And that focuses on security, performance, scalability, and flexibility. They increase the speed, so it supports 1.4 million transactions per settlement, and settlement, meaning the transaction is completed, is done in under 1 second. So this is extremely successful. This is an order of magnitude faster than our current digital transactions are completed. So obviously they're thinking about it. They're not far from thinking about it. Not only are they thinking about it, they're testing it, and it's basically ready to go. It's basically sitting on the shelf waiting for a crisis. All they need is a crisis to launch this. And, you know, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has said many times, and he reiterated again in his testimony on March 7th, that they won't launch the central bank's digital currency without congressional approval. And rightfully so. This is something that Congress should authorize. If it's going to be authorized, it should be by Congress, not by the Fed. And he said that. He was asked by Senator Cynthia Lummis Do you still agree that the Federal Reserve cannot introduce a U.S. central bank digital currency without congressional authorization? And he replied, yes, I do. So he's said that before, and he's reaffirming that again. He will wait until Congress authorizes it, then they're ready to go with their CBDC. All they need is congressional authorization. Well, let's look at our recent history. How fast has Congress acted in recent history? When the COVID-19 pandemic was announced by the WHO, it took our Congress only 2 months and 26 days to come out with and pass the CARES Act and the PREP Act to deal with that. So that's very quick. That's not too long. That's pretty quick. Presumably, they could do so with the same speed if some crisis were to come along where whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's an economic collapse through de-dollarization or something else. All they need is a crisis. Congress can act very quickly, and then we would see a CBDC. So what happened in Nigeria? Nigeria, it was very tragic. When they launched their e-Naira on October 2021, unfortunately, there was very low adoption. There still is low adoption. They still are less than it's like 0.5% of the population will still even use the e-Naira. Most of them use cryptocurrency or cash if they can, but at the time that they issued their CBDC, the government decided to redesign the banknotes, the cash. They wanted to redesign the cash notes. That created an artificial shortage of banknotes, and people couldn't get cash. They did that on purpose to try to force people to use the CBDC, but it didn't work, and people wouldn't use it. They even cut their ATM limits for cash withdrawals down to $45 a day in order to force people to use the digital e-Naira. People didn't like that. They didn't like that at all, and they set the city on fire, basically. There's many reports of riots breaking out and people setting cars on fire. They were burning the banks. They were really mad. So this, unfortunately, is what could happen. All these they had a lot of protests that were reported, and you can find these reports online on YouTube. Unfortunately, it was very tragic, too, because people didn't have the cash to buy food. They didn't have the cash to cover their medical expenses. So it was really quite tragic how everything erupted like that and violence erupted. We don't want to see that in our country. Hopefully, these central banks and governments have learned from this experience and don't do that when they introduce a CBDC. Because we don't want to see violence. We don't want to see, widespread rioting and burning down the country because people can't have access to cash. Hopefully they won't do that, but this is the potential that can happen if they try to force people with an arbitrary cash shortage to use CBDC. This was an extremely important development. I don't know if you know about the SWIFT network, but the SWIFT is a global bank messaging network. It's so widely used by financial institutions around the world. It connects over 11,000 banking and securities organizations, market infrastructures, and corporate customers in more than 200 countries. And for example, how widely used this is, in November 2022, an average of 44.8 million messages a day were sent through this network. This is very widely used. They completed phase 2 of their CBDC research project called Sandbox, and they issued the report in March 2024. It's called Connecting Digital Islands, and you can find this report online, and I've posted about it as well. So basically, they said in their press release that they're planning to launch a CBDC platform in 1 to 2 years. That's not very far away. That's not a lot of time. And their Sandbox project was so successful, they demonstrated they could ensure that different countries' CBDCs could all be used together. Even if they're developed on different platforms with different technology, they could all be used together in the SWIFT network. And that platform could be launched in 1 to 2 years. So this is how close we are. All they need is a crisis, like they had with the COVID crisis, how every country fell in lockstep and locked down at the same time. All they need is a similar crisis. All of these countries are working on CBDCs. It's just a few years away. It's just a couple years away. And that's the perfect system to enforce Satan's no buy, no sell policy. They would have that much control. So what's tokenization of private assets on the global unified ledger? This is another sort of piece of the architecture that would enforce Satan's no buy, no sell policy. And what this is a plan to tokenize all assets, even privately held assets, real-world assets, on a global unified ledger that would be centralized with one authority, presumably the Bank of International Settlements. On June 2023, the Bank of International Settlements released a chapter of its annual report, and it was entitled Blueprint for the Future Monetary System, Improving the Old, Enabling the New. And I wrote about this on my Substack as well. And you can find this report online. So according to the report, they show you basically what a token would do and what tokenization is. It's basically, in a tokenized setting, money or assets. And they refer in the report to the type of things that could be tokenized. Your bank deposits, any securities you own, anything you own in your 401k could be tokenized. Your car could be tokenized. Your house could be tokenized. Any real property that you own, any land you own, any real-world assets you own could be tokenized. And each token would be maintained on the programmable platform with one central authority. So each token would also be programmed with rules as to what the asset can and cannot do, and information as to what the asset is, where it comes from, who owns it, and it would be coded with smart contracts, which act like if-then statements. If this happens, then this asset gets transferred here, there, or whatever. All they need to do, it's a very fast system of transfer. And so they integrate the records of the underlying asset that's normally found in traditional databases, like the deed to your house is maintained in databases by the county or whatever authority maintains those land records. And they would be in this token. They would be programmed into this token. And so the one authority that owns the programmable platform can program how that token can be transferred, if it can be transferred, if it can be taken away from you. It could be taken away from you based on the token that's sitting on the programmable platform. So tokenization, again, is recording claims on financial or real assets that exist on a traditional ledger on a programmable platform. And also the report states that not only is the platform programmable and centralized to one authority, presumably the Bank of International Settlements, it will also contain a data environment that will accept real-world information as to real-world events that might impact the asset. So how could that work? Well, we all saw what happened with the truckers, right? With the trucker protests. The truckers, their bank accounts were seized. Anyone who donated to the truckers, their bank accounts were seized. With central bank digital currency and with tokenization on a global unified ledger, they could seize your money right away. They could seize your assets right away. If you're at a protest that the government doesn't like the January 6th event, and they don't like that, with this type of a system, they could seize your assets. They could just take your assets on this programmable platform. And like they say, every piece of information from real-world events that could possibly impact your assets or your transactions on the global unified ledger, that comes into the programmable platform. So they would have the control. And this is how, let me advance a little bit. Do you remember seeing this before? It's 2030, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. You may think you own some things, but they will control your assets on the global unified ledger. You won't be in control of your assets, they will be in control of your assets. And so just showing you how this is happening very quickly now as we speak. And the Boston Consulting Group, they did some research and they estimated that by 2030, 16 trillion worth of assets could be tokenized, real world assets that people own. That's what they're looking at. So there's been some tokenization, and they expect it to increase in 2024, 2025, all the way through to 2030. And the things that they're tokenizing, listed equity, unlisted equity, other equity, investment funds, bonds, home equity, and other financial assets or other tokenizable assets. They're looking to tokenize everything, every real-world asset that you might own. They want to tokenize on this global unified ledger. So are we ready? And like I said, you know, this could happen, this you'll own nothing and be happy, through any of these means, through digital IDs, through CBDCs, through tokenization of bank deposits and real-world assets on the global unified ledger. This is how you would own nothing, and purportedly they think you'll be happy with that. I mean, as Adventists, we know that if it comes down to a Sunday law or something like that, and we lose our assets and we lose our money, we would be happy. We should be happy. We should count that as a blessing, because that means we're on the right side of this great controversy. If we have to lose all of our assets to stand up for God in this world and not worship the mark of the beast, we should be happy. And I think we will be happy at that time. So I don't say any of these things to scare you. I just want to show you how close we are. We are living in the last days, and you can see that with these developments. So I thought this was a pretty funny meme, and I edited it a little bit, but any of these things could be used as a crisis. Any of these things. They've been talking about all of these things. We're seeing de-dollarization slowly happen, which could lead to an economic collapse. We're seeing China dump US treasuries, Russia's dumped US treasuries, Japan's dumping US treasuries. A lot of countries are dumping US treasuries. We see the BRICS nations coming together to form a currency that they want to back by gold. That's leading to de-dollarization. The dollar is slowly losing its reserve status in the world. The Petro Dollar we're seeing weaken because there's countries like India that have made deals with the Middle East to buy their oil in a different currency, not buy their oil in US dollars like they have been. They're going to buy their oil in a local currency. And there's other countries that are looking to do that. So right now we have preeminence in the world because of the petrodollar and because of our reserve status that we've enjoyed, but that's been weakening. And that process is called de-dollarization. And we're seeing that happen more and more. That could lead to an economic collapse. If the Fed is put in a situation, or the US government and the US Treasury is put in a situation where they want to try to retain hegemony, you know, they could come up with this crisis and impose CBDC to try to do that. It could happen with a cyber attack. The World Economic Forum has been warning and telling us for some time that we should see a global cyber attack. In fact, the managing director of the World Economic Forum, Jeremy Jurgens, he said that by 2025, there will be a global cyber attack. And they claim it will be worse than COVID, it'll spread faster than COVID, I think presumably through like a worm virus or something that would just infect everybody's computers, or they would claim your computer's affected. That's the type of cyber attack they've been predicting or warning could happen. So any of these things, or a combination of these things, could be used to impose tokenization and impose CBDCs. And Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, when he was testifying before the Senate Banking Committee on March 7th, he said, we've identified, he was talking about the banks they've identified that have high commercial real estate concentrations, particularly office and retail. He says, this is a problem that we'll be working on for years more. This is a problem that the Fed created, because we had been at interest rates, zero interest rates for 14 years, and then in a short period of time, they raised interest rates over 500 basis points. That put a lot of these commercial real estates in a loss of value. It also, the banks have been buying US Treasuries at zero interest rates for years. The banks are sitting on these bonds that were bought at zero interest rates. When you see when you have interest rates rise, the value of those bonds fall. So banks are seeing losses because they're sitting on those bonds that were bought at 0 interest rates, and now we're at like 5%. So that's just a short way to explain that situation. So he says there will be bank failures, but not the big banks. So all banks are sitting on these bonds. All banks have these commercial real estate. But we are going to see bank failures, and we're seeing that now. So within 50 days after he said that, Republic First Bank failed on April 26th, just very recently. It was a Philadelphia-based bank. It was seized by the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, and the FDIC has been appointed as a receiver. And Fulton Bank is acquiring it. So I don't want to scare you about bank failures, and really the FDIC promises that when a bank fails, the transition to the new bank should be smooth. This is what they're saying, and this is what we're seeing so far. There's a fear that if too many banks collapse at once, then there would be an economic collapse or some sort of issue. But so far, they're just failing one by one, and that other banks are just gobbling them up. And I think this is part of the plan. I think this is part of the plan to consolidate power in the major banks, because he said there will be bank failures, but not the big banks. They're going to save the big banks. They're going to save a handful of banks that they can control and let the other ones fail. That's what we're going to see. And this is after we've had 3 bank failures in 2023. First was Silicon Valley Bank, then First Republic, and then Signature Bank. Those 3 failed. We have our 4th bank failure with Republic First. So, and those 3 bank failures had more in assets than all the lenders that collapsed in the 2008 crisis. So, you know, it's a concern to see these bank failures, but the FDIC so far promises and so far has delivered that if the bank fails, it's going to be gobbled up by another bank, and you won't have a problem. Like you won't see any discontinuation of services. Your checks will still work. You'll still receive Social Security. Your debit card will still work. So far, that's what's been happening, and I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to have a controlled demolition of the banking sector, I think, and just let these banks fail while bigger banks gobble them up so that they control the smallest number of banks. That's my speculation, but I'm not alone in thinking that. This is a very interesting documentary that you really should check out if you get a chance to. It's called The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. David Rogers Webb is a former hedge fund guy, a very successful former hedge fund guy. And he's done a ton of research, and he's examined the laws in all the different states, the changes in the bankruptcy laws, the changes in the uniform commercial codes of each of the states. He sees that apparently the change that was made is when you own a security and you think you own it outright, like say you own stock or a bond or something like that, you think you own it outright. You don't actually own it outright. According to the change that was made in the Uniform Commercial Code, you have an ownership interest, but you don't actually own it outright. And apparently, so there's a derivatives market out there. And the collateral, he explains it with more articulation than I can right now, but he explains that this market is way larger than the amount of collateral that's securing it. So if there were an economic collapse, if there were major insolvencies, like he talks about major insolvencies from corporations and banks and such like that, there will be an economic collapse, and all of these assets that you think you own in securities, he's only talking about securities, but all your securities would be gobbled up by the creditor that holds the interest in that piece of collateral. That's what he explains, and he explains it very well in The Great Taking. That's a possibility, but that's only your securities that he's talking about. The greater threat is the global unified ledger, because that's tokenization of all your assets. All your real-world assets could be lost in a programmable platform that's centralized with one authority and tokenized on that platform. But this is an interesting documentary as well, and I encourage you to go ahead and watch it. It was very good. He doesn't give advice, like I can't give advice, he can't give you financial advice, but he had some pretty good tips as to what you could do in such a situation. So what can we do? Well, number one, a very good thing to do is be debt-free in such a situation, because any assets that are encumbered by debt potentially could be taken. Also, what he shows in The Great Taking, he spent a lot of time talking to people who lived through the Great Depression. And what he thinks, the type of depression we're going to see is going to be way worse than the Great Depression, he thinks. And I tend to agree. So there's an interesting story he told about a friend of his, which was much older than him, who lived through the Great Depression. That friend was a small child at the time of the Great Depression, and his parents were killed in a car accident just before the Great Depression. That child was sent to live on his grandfather's farm. And he said he didn't even know there was a Great Depression happening. They had everything they could ever want in the farm. They had food, they had everything they wanted on the farm. So that goes together with a lot of the things that Ellen G. White counsels us on in the end times of having a place in the country. You know, if you have a means of food production, you're not going to be as hurt by a Great Depression situation as other people will be. People who are, in the cities, the supermarket shelves are going to go bare pretty quickly if they can't be replenished. So another thing I suggest is throwing out your smart TV. Smart TVs, if you look at the terms and conditions, you actually give them permission to photograph you or film you in your home. So it's another tool of surveillance, which you can avoid by not having one. Of course, we all walk around with these cell phones also that are also listening to us and recording all the things that we say. But at least if you get rid of your smart TV, they can't, film you in your home. Oops. I also recommend that you get off Wi-Fi and hardwire your home. Your internet will be faster, and it will be another way to make your house a little bit more secure so that you can't potentially be spied on as easily. So what is hardwiring a home? That's where the internet is hardwired through your home, and you actually have to take a cable and plug into the wall to get the internet. I know it's not as convenient, and we used to do that, but it is a safer way to have your internet to be, to reduce the surveillance opportunities on your family. Avoid using or becoming reliant on the control grid. This is avoiding use of CBDCs once they're launched, avoiding digital IDs, avoiding vaccine passports, and if you can, avoid non-cash methods of payment. So use cash as much as possible. That'll make it harder for them to take it away from us. But as Adventists, we know what the end game is. We know where this is going. We know that at some point we're going to lose the opportunity to buy or sell. But we should be prepared for that and joyful when that day happens, when we get to stand up for God and lose the right to buy or sell. It will be a blessing because it means we're on the right side of this great controversy. So we all know that God provided food for Elijah, and we read about that in 1 Kings 17, 2-6. But wouldn't it be, and God will provide our water and our bread. The Bible tells us that our water and bread will be sure, and that's wonderful, and God will provide for us. But wouldn't it be so wonderful if we could meet God halfway and be able to identify those plants around us that are nutritious, that are high in vitamins, that have medicinal properties and can, treat some of our ailments? So I encourage you and implore you to work on your foraging skills. Be able to identify those plants in your area that you can rely on in case you needed food, and have a means for food production. Also, you could find now and buy food from a local farmer. The less that you're dependent on the supermarkets, the better position you'll be. If you have a good relationship with a local farmer who's like-minded, or if you're a farmer yourself, if you have a means of food production, if you can start a garden, if you can produce food that you can depend on, do some canning, have some emergency food stored for your family, that will help you through these difficult times a little bit better. But, we should remember that God will bless us. And Ellen G. White says, "He who taught Adam and Eve in Eden how to tend the garden desires to instruct men today. There's wisdom for him who drives the plow and sows the seed. Before those who trust and obey him, God will open ways of advance. Let them move forward courageously, trusting in him to supply the needs according to his riches and goodness. And God has treasures for us in the country. She also says in Country Living, the earth has blessings hidden in her depths for those who have the courage and will and perseverance to gather her treasures. It's a good thing to have land in the country where you can grow things. And if you have that, that's wonderful. You can help your family and you can help other families around you that would be in need. And that's what God wants to see from us in these last days. You know, we shouldn't just hole ourselves up on a property and wait this storm out. We should, have an outpost. We should be a blessing to someone who's in need. And the more that we can do that, the more that, we'll be helped through this situation. And it's really what Jesus wants to see us do. That's the type of character that we want to have when Jesus comes. That's what he wants us to have. He wants us to be like he would be, feeding the needy, helping the poor, helping someone who's in need. That's what we should be doing. And that we can prepare for that. So Pastor Doug Batchelor also says, God originally intended people to be in nature and to enjoy the incredible works of his hands, the incredible creative works of his hands. Working in the outdoors can reduce your stress and help you take in the life-giving properties of sunshine, fresh air, and exercise. And it can give you peace and draw you closer to the Creator. And one of the things that David Rogers Webb says in The Great Taking, it's very good advice. The things that make you happy, do them, have them around, And as Adventists, what makes us happy, or what should be making us happy, is reading God's Word, spending time in the Word, praying, getting out in the fresh air, enjoying God's handiwork in the country and in nature. Those things will give you peace, and certainly having that close relationship with God will give us peace in the end times. And God will supply our needs on the land also. She said in Country Living, if the land is cultivated, it will, with the blessing of God, supply our necessities. We're not to be discouraged about temporal things because of apparent failures, nor should we be disheartened by delay. We should work the soil cheerfully, hopefully, gratefully, believing that the earth holds in her bosom rich stores for the faithful worker to garner, and stores richer than gold or silver. Certainly, they will be more important to us in that type of situation than gold or silver. And she also says, serious times are ahead. Serious times are before us. There's great need for families to get out of the cities and into the country, where the truth may be carried into the byways and highways of this earth. And, being in the city is not going to be fun in this kind of situation. When the supermarkets start running out of food, Americans are 9 meals away from total anarchy when you think about it. It doesn't take long. And we should remember, this is more truer today, I think, than it was back in her time. But Sister White says, it's Satan's purpose to attract men and women to the cities and to gain his object. He invents every kind of novelty and amusement, every kind of excitement to take their attention away. And the cities of the earth today are becoming as they were before the flood. And I think we see that. So my message today is just to implore you. I want to implore you to just awaken and prepare. As watchmen, we should, wake the people up around us too, and show us we can see through these events, the way technology is moving, and these things that the governments and central banks are doing around the world. We can see that we're living in the last days. So it's time to prepare. And these things will be used as instruments of control. The Global Unified Ledger and CBDCs will be used as instruments of control. And, the Bible says, pray that your flight be not in the winter or on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as what was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor shall ever be. So we're going to see times worse than we've ever seen in history. And this technology provides the opportunity for us to see those difficult times. It's time to prepare and be ready watchmen. So Mark 13:35 through 36 says, "Watch ye therefore, for you know not when the master of the house cometh, or even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping." We don't want to be sleeping Adventists. We don't want the Adventists around us to be sleeping either. You know, we're in a parable of the 10 virgins situation. We got to make sure that our lamps are filled with oil before it's too late. So now is high time to awaken out of sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we believed. And that's certainly true today more than ever. And Ellen White says, "We've come to serious times. Events in our world call upon every follower of Christ to be totally in earnest in our relationship with God. To strengthen this relationship and satisfy our emotional and spiritual needs, we must learn the power of prayer." This is so important. This is one of the best ways that we can prepare for the times coming, is to build our relationship with Christ earnestly and spend time in prayer, and don't miss your morning devotions. We need to have that close relationship with God. But God will protect us. You know, Isaiah 43:2 says, "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee." So what should we do to prepare? This is a good list of things we can do to prepare, right? We can form an intimate relationship with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, or if you already have that relationship, make sure it's even stronger. And we should be walking with God the way Enoch walked with God, the way Noah walked with God. Pray without ceasing and pray as never before. Watch as these events unfold and look for the signs of Jesus coming, because we are living in the last days. And worship God as never before and work for Jesus. Use your gifts and your talents for his glory. Read the Bible daily. Satan well knows that all whom he can lead to neglect prayer and searching the scriptures will be overcome by his attacks. Therefore, he invents every possible device to engross the mind. I love this quote from The Great Controversy, and nothing is more true than today. How many devices do we have around us that distract us every day, especially our cell phones? You know, Satan wants us to be distracted. Satan wants us to be unprepared for what's coming, because if we are unprepared, then we can be lost, and that's his aim and his goal. So let's not be unprepared. Let's make sure that we are prepared. And like I said earlier, it's not a time for fear. You know, no good decisions are made in a fear state. And God doesn't want us to have a spirit of fear. He wants us to trust in him and to be close to him and rely on him. And we know that at some point, we're going to be totally dependent on God. We're going to lose all earthly support. So let's build that close relationship with God now, because it's going to be so important in getting through these situations. So that's my encouragement to you, and thank you for letting me speak today. So, does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to take questions.
Isn't that digital currency supposed to help control money laundering, that type of thing?
The question is, isn't that central bank digital currency supposed to help control money laundering? Yes, that's one of the things they say that they need it for, is to track where the money's going and to prevent money laundering. That's one thing. They also give reasons like inclusion, like somehow it's supposed to end poverty, which isn't really true. There's a lot of unbanked people out there, and they say we need to reach the unbanked with this central bank digital currency so that they can have access to banking. Well, if they're unbanked, it might be by choice. I don't know, but it's really a system of control. The central bank digital currency doesn't offer any benefits to you, the consumer. It only benefits the government to be able to control you. Yes?
Is the CBDC as a response to DeFi and crypto, do you think?
The question is CBDC a response to DeFi and crypto? And he's talking about decentralized finance and crypto. Yeah, it kind of is. I was always skeptical of crypto. I learned about Bitcoin in around like 2017 or something like that, and I probably should have bought some just to make a bunch of money. But I did buy some along the way and sell it and everything. I bought and sold crypto along the way. But I really don't believe in crypto, and I really have trouble believing in crypto because being a trader and watching the banks don't let things get in the way of their business. And they're not going to let CBDCs get in the way of their business either. That's why the Fed is talking about a two-tiered banking system, the same as what we have now. Like, banks don't want to be eliminated with a direct issue CBDC. They want that synthetic CBDC model so they can stay in business. Well, banks don't let things get in the way of their business. And I always thought if the crypto and decentralized finance got big enough, banks will just shut it down. Either the country will outlaw it, they'll force lawmakers to outlaw it, and we're seeing a lot of regulation of it, or they'll just over-regulate it so that it really doesn't have much use. And we're starting to see more and more regulation. We see legislation in the Congress, about stable coins. They're trying to shut down stable coins and all that, Tether, and they're always talking negatively about Tether and Circle and all that. So they would like to get rid of it.
So to follow up on that, how does the intermediary get away with getting around the Fourth Amendment, like you said?
So the question is, how does the intermediary get around the Fourth Amendment? Well, I think we're going to see something similar to what we saw during the pandemic with the First Amendment. So we know that during the pandemic, and even now, there are things you cannot say on social media. Our freedom of speech, the internet and the social media companies are basically the town square. They're today's idea of the town square. You can't have an audience unless you have it on social media, or you can't have a big audience anyway. We need YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all these social medias to reach people, to communicate with people. And we've seen our rights completely shut down by these private social media companies, right? So the government basically outsourced, because the Constitution says the government can't restrict your right to free speech. But it doesn't say a social media company can't restrict your rights to free speech. And the courts apparently are ruling in that way. The courts are ruling that the social media company is like a publisher and can edit what's on its platform, can restrict what speech is on its platform. That's wrong in my opinion. Social media companies should be like public utilities. You should be able to say whatever you want on social media. But that's not the way courts are ruling. And that's the way that the government outsourced freedom of, trampling freedom of speech. They outsource that to the private social media companies. And we know that from the Twitter files. From the Twitter files that were released, we know that the White House had direct access to Twitter's content moderating algorithm. So the White House could direct what speech was on Twitter and what accounts were shadow banned and stuff like that. We know that from the Twitter files that have come out. So I say look at that as an example, and that's how they're going to try to get around the Fourth Amendment. They're going to outsource encroaching on your privacy rights to these banks that are going to be responsible to the Federal Reserve. And not even that, every transaction that you have, even though there's a bank in between you and the central bank, the ledger belongs to the Federal Reserve. That ledger, every transaction is going to be recorded on that ledger, and that's the central bank's ledger. So they could see all your transactions anyways, if there's a bank in between you and them or not. But it looks like it's a private company doing it. You see what I'm saying? I think they're going to make the argument that the private bank as intermediary restricting your rights is not the same as the federal government restricting your rights. Like, same with free speech. They're going to say, you're not losing your right to privacy because JP Morgan Chase is doing it and not the central bank or not the government. You see what I'm saying? So that's my answer.
I haven't heard you mention anything about the quantum financial system. Are you familiar with that? And if so, can you explain what that is and how that works?
I don't really know much about the quantum financial system. That was brought up for me the first time last week at Hayden. And I've heard the term, I don't know much about it. People have said that it has to do with gold backing up the currency or something like that. I'm not really familiar with it. I don't know that it's gonna happen. You know what I'm saying? I know how the banks work, and I know how the central banks work, and they don't want to lose power. So if this quantum financial system means that they don't have any power anymore, I don't know that that's going to happen. You know, they like to keep their power. And, you know, the Bank of International Settlements is also, you know, wants them to be in power as well, the central banks, because they want to control people. And they want to intervene and you know, control your rights in this way. That's why the technology is moving towards this. And you saw the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements, Augustin Carstens, he's just gleeful about the fact that central banks can now control how the currency is used. You know, it's so I don't know. I need to learn more about it. I need to learn more about this quantum financial system. I really don't know much about it.
Supposedly it's already in play, and all of our bank accounts are mirrored onto it.
Okay, so if you didn't hear that, she said so somehow supposedly it's all already in play and our bank accounts are mirrored onto it. I don't know. I don't know anything about that. I haven't seen that yet, so I'll have to do some research. Are there any other questions?
I just see here. I wish my husband was here. He remembers this better than me. But that the Constitution can be suspended in certain cases, like in case it says here, unless in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it.
Yeah, that's true. They say that as well, and they did suspend the Constitution during the pandemic because they said it was an emergency situation. They'll do that again. You know, the Constitution's been thrown out the window. They can throw it out the window again. A lot of our rights have been taken from us, and they really haven't been restored. You know, so.
I don't know if this is true or not, but the word on the internet is that the government has already mandated that the banks go to a digital system, and that there are already some banks that are testing it out.
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. You mean in this country or in other countries?
The U.S.
In the U.S.? Well, FedNow is basically the infrastructure on which a CBDC can be built. It's built in such a way that they can build layers on top of it. It would be very easy to build a CBDC on top of this instant payment system. And really, they needed an instant payment system before bringing out the CBDC so that they'd have a way to transfer money quickly. And that's what they basically launched that with FedNow. When the CBDC comes out, I think it'll just be built on that system because the technology of FedNow is such that there can be other layers built onto it. And they've talked about that. If you read the papers on the FedNow website, they talk about different phases coming out. Like they've only launched their first phase of FedNow. There's other phases that will come out that will have greater capabilities. So we're going to see more of that, yeah.
So what banks have FedNow?
There's a list of them. I showed you there's like 728 or something I said. It's a lot of, so it's over 700. And you can see that on the website that I showed you, the FRB services website, and go to the part that says organizations. There's a page on that website that lists every single bank. So you can check for yourself which banks are on there. And that list is changing all the time. The Fed's goal was to have 10,000 banks and financial institutions signed up with FedNow, and so far they're only up to 728. So they're trying to get a lot more banks and financial institutions onboarded onto this FedNow system. That's their goal. So you may go next week and it may be even more banks and financial institutions. It's been rather slow, I think, in my opinion. This was launched back in July 2023, and they only have 728 banks on there. So
Digital currency is not that far away.
it's not that far away. It's not that far away. That's what I'm trying to show you, we are living in the last days. Like, they're setting up the architecture for the perfect no buy, no sell policy enforcement mechanism, So CBDC isn't the mark of the beast, but it's the enforcement mechanism. It's how they can say whether or not you can buy or sell. When I was 16 years old sitting in church with my family, I was like, how can they control what you can buy or sell? How can they do that? How can they prevent you from buying or selling anything? They have the technology now. Now they have the technology to do it. So that's what I'm just trying to show you, how close we are. Swift is ready to launch their platform in a year or two. They're saying 1 to 2 years. We're very close.
Is it based off of Chinese, both by their debt rating and personal rating?
China's is, the Chinese people is off of their system. The US or any other country could adopt a similar system. China's basically paving the way. Everything that we see in China, we could see here. Right now in China, you can't buy food without a digital ID. You have to, there's this video that's kind of gone viral. I've seen it out there a few times of this poor Chinese lady, looking into the screen, trying to get the app to access so she can buy food. And the app is telling her, close your mouth, open your mouth, close your mouth. She's doing all these facial expressions that the stupid app is telling her to do, and it still won't open. She still can't buy food. This is what we're seeing in China. We could see that here, where they're just they're following in the footsteps of China. They're letting China start everything and develop everything, and then we'll bring it here. Satan wants these types of devices to control us, to try to force as many people to worship the image of the beast. That's the end game. We know that. So this is how it's all working out. I'm just showing you what they're doing.
Question. Just before the banks closed during the Great Depression, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I can't remember the name of the treasurer, they pulled out the money at the very last minute, and because of that, the church denominationally was able to survive. Have you ever heard that story before?
I had not heard that before,
Yeah.
but that's interesting. That's great. That's
Because my
fantastic.
question kind of centers around our church's preparedness for this, because I think the Seventh-day Adventist Church's annual income is about $2 billion, and churches across North America are approaching $1 trillion of income. And I was employed by the church, but when I saw the memo come out from the Upper Columbia Conference that we will be following the state mandates and close the churches, and this church miraculously, through a whole bunch of unusual events, did not close.
Praise God for
There was a
that.
period of time, I think, where maybe a couple of weeks we were meeting at the Gymn at that time, and was able to close it. And all of a sudden this church grew massively because of an asylum, I guess you'd say, from Washington and other places that were coming to this church. But I just wonder, when I heard that, and I know that right now the Oregon Conference, they're laying off 30 pastors.
Wow.
Even as I speak. They have suspended the camp meeting because they were going to have to borrow $380,000 to operate it.
Wow.
And part of that is because the administration, they high-handedly closed the churches.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. My last district was in Seaside, Astoria, and Long Beach, Washington, and the head elder was telling me about some of the draconian measures that the pastors were being, some of them were willfully doing it. Just flat out. Our pastor here went through that. And I don't know exactly. I think he went ahead and kept the Stone Tower Church open, as far as I know. But I'm looking at the church and I'm thinking about when we take a children's offering here, it's all cash. No, I don't think anybody throws a check in the mill. And anyway, it's just something to think about. Ellen White says that when the shaking comes by the introduction of false theories, the people of God will slide into any position to suit their tenor of feelings of bitterness. And then it goes ... And I said, bitterness about what? This is in Testimonies to Ministers, about 110, page 110 and following. And I've searched that out, and I've contacted Ellen White Estate, and they said, this is coming from many sources of different manuscripts. What? I want to know what followed that. It was a string of them. You can look it up, Testimony Letter 110. Is it bitterness about what you're talking about hitting the fan here? Because it's probably going to.
Well, yeah, you're right, absolutely right. And that was one of the things that shocked me. And it wasn't just the Gymn in New Jersey, them losing their money, that brought me back to the church. I saw how churches folded and closed. And I'm from New Jersey and New York, and my sister lives in New York, and my family lives in Connecticut, and my aunt lives in Rhode Island, and all across the board, churches were shut down. Churches locked down. Churches should never lock down. Churches are protected by the Constitution. There's no way churches should have locked down. And when I was sitting at home, when I saw what happened to the Gymn and saw churches shut down, I was appalled that churches shut down, because they're the ones who should stand up and say, no, we're opening, we're protected by the Constitution, we're staying open. But they folded, and terrible things were happening. The conference was firing pastors because they wouldn't take the shot. That's wrong. That should never happen. And it just appalled me and actually drove me back to the church, because I was so pissed off. I was sitting home, I was pissed off, and people were calling me a conspiracy theorist, and they're still calling me a conspiracy theorist, but, churches should never shut down, and hopefully they learn that lesson. They need to stay open, stand on their rights, I don't understand the decisions that the conference has made, as a result of this pandemic, but whatever. I think we need to do the right thing and open up our homes as home churches. If the churches do shut down, or if they're closed down by the state, we need to be prepared to have a home church, and have many home churches maybe.
I wanted to just give you a thanks for your Substack, because we subscribed to that early on, and read back when you sent that article out about FedNow back in July. And at that time, I still remember there were 28 banks on the list at that time, and ours was one of them, and one of the major banks. And so we made a decision within a day of reading that on your Substack to change to a different bank. And so, and we read the advice that was given as far as, or the counsel, it was good information as far as when we were going to look at another bank, is to make sure that we ask the question, do you have any plans to participate in the FedNow program? And the bank that we're now banking with said they were aware of it, but they had no plans to do it, and we said, that's why we're coming to bank with you. Interestingly, some things that had started to happen, and I won't name our major bank that we were with, but some things that were making me uncomfortable, even before the whole FedNow thing happened, was when I would go in and make any sizable, and I'm talking 1K or above withdrawal, I was getting questions as to, how are you going to use this? Like almost like doe-eyed, oh, I hope you're doing something fun with this. What are you doing? And I did not like that. And I have never once been asked at our new bank, not once, how we're using the funds. And so it's none of their business, but yet you can't say that to them because you don't want to flag something. I'm just saying it's interesting because I think in the smaller banks, for as long as we can be with them, it's a good thing. So all that to say, that's our personal testimony about really thank you for your Substack. It's extremely informational and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's one thing I recommend, is that if you take a look at that list of banks, if you don't want to be part of this system, and if you want to have more freedom with your money for longer, go to a bank that's not on the FedNow list and tell them that's why you're choosing to place your business with them. You are bringing your money to their bank because they're not on FedNow. You don't want FedNow. You don't want to see a CBDC. And you're going to find some bankers that don't know what you're talking about. That's the situation my sister had. She wanted to make sure, they started a nonprofit, and they wanted to make sure that the bank account was with a bank that wasn't listed on FedNow, and they went to the bankers and asked them the question. And they were like, what's FedNow? What's a CBDC? What are you talking about? Some of these people in the banking industry don't even know about this because it's not widely publicized. And they should know their industry, in my opinion. I'm watching their industry. They ought to watch their industry. But you're going to find, don't be discouraged if you find people who don't know about FedNow and don't know about CBDC. This is your opportunity to educate them and let them know that if the bank chooses not to go down that road, that you'll stay with them. You'll provide them business and support them as long as they support you and your freedom. And that's one of the things that Catherine Austin Fitts, also, if you've ever heard of her, she's a brilliant lady, and she runs the Salary Report, and she was, I think she worked for HUD or something, or she worked under George Herbert Walker Bush in his administration. And so she recommends that you establish a relationship with a local banker like you did. Ask the questions and make sure you have a good relationship with that banker and know your banker. You know, that's the best way you can protect your money and your assets, is to know your banker and make sure you're with a good banker who has the same, kind of mindset that you have and doesn't want to go with FedNow or is not with FedNow. And, let them know that you'll support them. Don't, if they don't stay with FedNow, but if they go with FedNow, you'll go somewhere else if you can, if there is a bank around that doesn't go with FedNow. So that's something you can do, and thank you for that. I appreciate that. I appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
Hi there, and thank you for coming. It's been very good, and your presentation is so clear and caring. Anyway,
you.
I guess I'd like to just suggest that you came back to Jesus, and the church as an organization, we will see how that goes, and the truth that Jesus taught and the scriptures and God has revealed in the scriptures, and that you could come back to those. That's what you came back to. And so I think that's marvelous, because many times people get bitter and just throw everything away. And if you came back, it sounds like you were answering his call, and thank you for doing that.
Praise God. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was so frustrated and mad. And somebody said to me, I think it was Dr. Conrad Fine, when I told him my story, he's like, this is the first time I've ever heard of a conversion story that started out of anger. That's very funny. But it's true, I was mad and I was frustrated and I was like, these churches shouldn't be doing this. And it just basically showed me we are in the last days. And the things that I didn't think could happen when I was 16 years old, looking to go to law school, or even all those years I practiced law in New York, I never thought they could control whether you could buy or sell anything, or any of these prophecies could unfold. I suddenly saw how I could see they could unfold, and they're unfolding right now. We're living out the fulfillment of prophecy. We're seeing it unfold right before our eyes. And I saw that, and I was like, oh, I need to start reading my Bible again, and I need to get back to church again. And I came back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church because it's the one church that follows the Bible the most, the most clearly and strictly. It's the one religion that follows the most. The Jews are close, but they won't accept Jesus. All the Sunday churches are worshiping on the wrong day. They're not following the fourth commandment. The Adventist church is the church that follows the Bible most closely, and that's why I came back to it. And yes, I was raised as an Adventist, so it was easy to come back to, but I think that if I had been raised as a Baptist, I'd still be looking for the truth. And I think we're going to see that in the last days. I think other people are going to wake up, and they're going to join the remnant from all these other denominations. So I'm grateful that my parents raised me as an Adventist, so it was easy to come to. But you see other testimonies of people who were raised in other religions who finally are looking for the truth and something that follows the Bible most closely. And for the most part, it's the Adventist Church. You know, the conference makes some questionable decisions sometimes, but we have doctrines that, you know, sola scriptura, we're following the Bible. And as long as the church does follow the Bible, I will stay with the church. If the conference wants to go down a different path, bye-bye conference. I don't really care what the conference says. I'm following the Bible, and I'm staying with God's remnant. People are going to be those people who follow his word and have his light inside him. So that's most important.